Now, this part of the chapter discusses hormonal influence on growth. Now, what are the hormones that affect our growth? Obviously, the first and foremost is growth hormone. Growth hormone levels are highest during puberty, and that's when growth is the fastest, followed by childhood period, and it's at its lowest level during adulthood. We also have insulin-like growth factors. These are a group of hormones that are divided into insulin growth factor 1, or IGF-1, and IGF-2. IGF-1 is made by the liver, synthesized by the liver cells, in response to the liver cells being exposed to growth hormone. And that's why we call it growth hormone dependent IGF-1. And we'll see their function in the next slide. IGF-2, these are not dependent on growth hormone, so we call it a growth hormone independent. And IGF-2 has a role in prenatal period development and in the elderly. We're really not sure what that role is, so we really haven't identified the role, but we do know that it's there. Now, T3, one of the thyroxines, insulin hormone, sex hormones, so testosterone and estradiol, and cortisol. 1 through 5 stimulate growth, while cortisol inhibits growth. So let's take a look at the functions of each of these hormones. So growth hormone, that is the major stimulus of growth after delivery, so postnatal growth. And as we mentioned, it's at its highest during puberty, followed by childhood, minimal levels or lowest levels during adulthood. It is going to induce the production of IGF-1. IGF-1 stimulates cell division. Okay, IGF-1 is made in the liver, and it also, growth hormone also stimulates protein synthesis. So you can see that it'll stimulate the growth of bone, muscle, skin, and so on. Now, insulin stimulates fetal growth. Okay, it also stimulates postnatal growth by the stimulating the secretion of IGF-1, and it stimulates protein synthesis. So anything that is going to enhance growth or increase the growth of a person would obviously have to increase your protein synthesis. Now, thyroid hormones. Remember that thyroid hormone is permissive for growth hormone secretion. It is important in order to release growth hormone from the anterior pituitary. And it's also permissive for the development of the CNS. If you remember, you can go back to congenital hypothyroidism, and you'll see how the thyroid levels, especially T3, in utero is important for the development of neurons and dendrites and myelin sheath and so on. Now, testosterone and estrogens, those play an important role, especially during puberty. Okay, they are going to stimulate the growth of the epiphyseal plates, which are the growth plates in the bones, and that's why you'll find that kids tend to get taller during puberty. And then it stimulates the ossification of these growth plates. So first they'll grow and then they'll stop growing. So again, stimulate the epiphyseal plates, eventually leading to their closure. Again, both testosterone and estrogen. And they both of them as well stimulate the secretion of growth hormone, testosterone more so than estrogen. And testosterone also increases protein synthesis in males. Now, cortisol is the only hormone among all of these that we've discussed that inhibits growth. It stimulates protein catabolism, which is the breakdown of protein, as we've discussed before. Now, here you can take a look at a graph showing you age versus growth. The first one on the top, that blue line, green-blue line, indicates the growth of the brain. So you can see here that during the first 2 years of life, that is where the majority of brain growth is happening, and that's why parents and caregivers are told, do not give kids any screen time during the first 2 years, because this is where a good portion of brain growth is occurring. And you can see that brain growth brain growth keeps on going up until about the age of 12, so around puberty age, where brain growth has kind of reached, a top level, and now we are going to go into the growth of the reproductive organs. Total body height that increases through childhood, and then it kind of plateaus up until puberty hits, and then again, it increases rapidly and then tends to hit their adulthood length. Now, what are the major effects of growth hormone? Well, first off, it promotes growth. Okay, it stimulates the liver cells to secrete IGF-1. And then IGF-1 in itself is considered a hormone. It'll circulate through the bloodstream and go to the precursor cells, whether it's in the bone or muscle or whatever tissue, and stimulate those cells, those precursor cells, to also make IGF-1. Now, that IGF-1 will stimulate these cells to divide and produce that growth that you see in the bone or in the muscle tissue. So that IGF-1 that is made by these precursor cells kind of acts as a paracrine hormone, stimulating the surrounding cells. It stimulates protein synthesis predominantly in your muscles. Okay, and in order to do so, it has to increase the uptake of amino acids and increasing the synthesis and the activity of ribosomes. So growth hormones are going to increase the number of ribosomes found in cells. Growth hormone has what is known as an anti-insulin effect, especially of high levels of growth hormone. Okay, so growth hormone tends to oppose the action of insulin. And what it does, you can see here that it'll make these adipocytes or our fat cells, it'll make them more responsive to break down the triglycerides into the 3 fatty acid chains and glycerol. The liver will take those fatty acid chains and make glucose out of them, a process that we call gluconeogenesis. And it also reduces the ability of insulin to stimulate the glucose uptake by cells. So normally, the effect of insulin on your cells would be to increase the intake of glucose inside to the inside of the cell. So from the bloodstream to take it into the cell. Growth hormone has an anti-insulin effect, so it'll oppose that action, okay, keeping glucose in the bloodstream. It will break down adipocytes to release fatty acids. We could use those to make glucose as well in the process known as gluconeogenesis. So anything that tends to increase your glucose levels in the bloodstream gets a term an anti-insulin effect. So make sure you understand how this works. Insulin tends to decrease blood glucose in our blood. Anything that has an anti-insulin effect will do the opposite. It will increase blood glucose levels. Now, the environmental control of growth. So yes, our growth depends a lot on hormones, but it also depends on other things like vitamins and minerals. It depends on physical activity. So if kids are active or not, depends on the exposure to sunlight in order to get, these different vitamins in. It depends on how much protein these kids are taking in and so on. So all of that can interfere with growth, and also chronic and serious illnesses. So kids, say, for example, that are going through chronic diseases like maybe cancers or so on, those are going to decrease their growth hormone levels, increase their cortisol levels, and we know that is going to lead to stunted growth or the delaying of growth. So compared to their kids at their age group, they are going to look younger. But if a kid is given proper nutrition, recovers from that illness, they can catch up on growth, and it brings that kid that lost, these, quote unquote, those years of growth, they could kind of get to the normal range expected for that child's age. Now, these are abnormalities of growth hormones levels. It all depends on when in life that increase in growth hormone level happened. So we can either get gigantism or acromegaly. So again, remember, growth hormone is made by the anterior pituitary. So let's say the anterior pituitary gets a tumor that is secreting high levels of growth hormone. Again, depending on when that patient gets that tumor, if the tumor occurs before the closure of the epiphyseal plates, before the closure of those growth plates, that is going to lead to what is known as gigantism, where leads to long, very long elongation of their long bones. So you can see here, compared to this, to a normal person, how all of these bones, the humerus and the femur and so on, how much longer they are than normal. That again is known as gigantism. But if the person gets that pituitary adenoma, or the tumor in the pituitary gland that is going to secrete growth hormone after the closure of these growth plates, well, the person can no longer grow in length, but they are going to grow in width. So the bones, that is a condition known as acromegaly, where the bones start to grow in width. And you can see here that the facial features change totally over time. So this is the young lady's picture before, and this is how she has changed over the years. And you can even see the change in the hands and then the wrists as well. So acromegaly means that, the parts of the body are going to be bigger in size. So again, the difference between them, they are both caused due to the hypersecretion of growth hormone. The difference is, when did that person get exposed to all that growth hormone? Was it before the closure of the epiphyseal plates that led to gigantism, or was it after the closure of the epiphyseal plates, and that would lead to acromegaly? And this ends